Let's Talk Small Business, the real talk, no BS podcast for business owners and entrepreneurs who want to grow and actually enjoy the ride. I'm Mitchell Wilson. Let's get into it. Today's guest is Toby Lawrence. He's the founder and CEO of Arrow Health Private Hospital and Addiction Treatment Program, but he's also an entrepreneur, so we're going to find out a whole lot about what he's doing. Now, with the Arrow Health, it really sits at the intersection of purpose, healthcare, governance, operational excellence, and of course, a deeply human story of service delivery. Now, Toby's story of the Arrow Healthcare is it started with that personal family experience and then grew into a serious evidence-based organization, helping individuals and families navigate addiction and recovery. However, we are talking business today. So, Toby, let's talk small business.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, thanks for coming on. So, first of all, let's just focus on the Arrow Health side, but I'm really keen to find out your side because you've got so many fires burning at the moment. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes, there's a few things going on, but Arrow's sort of the work that's taken up the bulk of my time for the better part of 13 or 14 years now. It's been a tumultuous road that we've travelled. Going right back to the start.
Tell me about the origins. Where did it all start?
So originally, I guess it started a little bit when I was at university. So when I went to university, I had no idea what I wanted to do. So I did a bachelor's degree in behavioural neuroscience, and that is a really excellent sounding degree that doesn't really give you any direction post completion. So off the back of that, I ended up working for a psychometric testing, sort of HR psychometric testing firm in Melbourne, and sort of things progressed, and then I found myself working on big projects as a management consultant around Australia. Now, management consultant is a term that gets thrown around a lot. Essentially, I saw myself as a person that used to go into these big businesses and apply common sense and nothing more. And I did that, and it was a fly-in, fly-out job. So I was doing a lot of work, sort of 10 days on, 4 days off, flying all around Australia, which sounds lovely and glamorous, and it's a horrible lifestyle. Getting into hotels at 10 p.m., getting up at 6 a.m. to get back down to work. It's not conducive to sort of what I would call a balanced approach to life. At the same time, my family was having issues with my brother, who was a drug addict. So he had started using sort of softer drugs, marijuana, while he was at school. And because of that sort of use, his academics had dropped a little bit, and there was a bit of argy-bargy around what was best for him. And I'm cramming a lot of, 12 years into about 2 minutes here. And then what happened is that he and his peer group eventually started using harder and harder drugs, and he started using methamphetamine. He had to switch schools. Things got worse. He went through a number of public and private facilities, both just post-school and when he was doing an apprenticeship as a carpenter, none of which seemed to work. And at one stage, he sort of progressed to using heroin. All the while, I'm sort of doing this fly-in, fly-out work, and I'm trying to support my family and having the background in sort of psychology and neuroscience and behaviour change. A lot of this didn't make sense. I was doing a lot of research on my own behind the scenes, and ultimately it just came to be one night. He eventually got into what we call recovery, so he got clean. And we were talking, and we decided that as a family unit, we'd learnt so much about addiction and addiction treatment and about support, not just for the individual, but also the family, that it would be remiss of us if we didn't try and apply that and help others. So that's where the seeds of Arrow Health were born. And, in those first sort of 12 months, the amount of people that said that we were mad or that it couldn't be done, or that we had no idea what we were doing, I couldn't count. Thousands of people would come up to me and go, this isn't going to work. You don't know what you're doing, which only drove me harder, because I think when people ask me what's the major motivation behind why you started Arrow and why you continue to run it today, it's really to prove to everybody that despite the odds, you can make something out of nothing. So that's what drove me. We started running the program. We began as an outpatient program, so that's where people would come to us for the day, and we'd sort of teach them about
Mm-hmm.
addiction and about behaviour change and go through some therapies. And we did that for a couple of months, and then we moved into a residential facility. So we hired a residential facility in country Victoria, and we sort of put the logistics together, and we were running people up and down from there, and it was slowly building. And then, unfortunately, my brother, who I'd started this with while he was in recovery, he passed away. So the anchor point for the business, the person who I would term the expert or the knowledge center
Mm-hmm.
of how to interact with people suffering from addiction, he passed away. And collectively, as a family, we had to come to the decision of what we were going to do there. Were we going to draw a line in the sand, or were we going to continue on? And ultimately, we sort of deemed that we would continue on and kept building. But it was, it was horrible. Those first 7 years, when I look back, and I don't think of myself as an old person, but when I look back on sort of my life, those first 7 years of Arrow were soul destroying. You're looking at the profit and loss. You're looking at marketing costs. You're trying to cut costs everywhere you can look. We're buying secondhand computers. We are literally robbing Peter to pay Paul to keep the wheels moving. It was terribly hard. I figured out that one of the big obstacles for us to deliver the quality program that we wanted to deliver and get the outcomes that we were after was the cost. Most people didn't have the funds available to pay for the type of program that we were offering. And because we were in this space of healthcare and medicine, I'd essentially sat down and worked out that we needed to become a hospital in order to not only improve the quality of our output, but also to open up other funding streams, i.e. private health funds. So I sat down and we went through sort of the accreditation requirements with DHS and a number of other organisations. And basically over a 3 to 6 month period, we moved from where we were to a new facility in Wood End. And I went through and basically got all the policies and procedures, redid our operating paradigm, and essentially got us accredited as a private hospital. And then, people had said to me, it's still never going to work. It's never going to work. And then 1 January, just before COVID hit, funnily enough, I just saw this massive uptick in occupancy. And that's when you sort of feel like it's like catching a wave on a surfboard. You're suddenly on it and you go, wow, things are moving now. But it's not without a lot of hard work to keep it going. So there's, we've been growing. We're now at 28 beds. I've got a team of doctors and psychiatrists and, complement of nursing staff, support workers. I've got kitchen, cooks and cleaners and all sorts underneath in this massive team of people that go to work every day to change people's lives. But it's still, it's not a massive business. It's still relatively sort of small to medium. So those everyday trials and tribulations never go away. Always looking at the marketing, sort of looking at that 2 to 3 month pipeline. What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? Trying to generate data, trying to separate ourselves from the rest of the pack. It's a never ending, I don't want to use the word battle, but that's what it feels like. It's a never ending battle.
So, okay, you talked about the initial years being 7 years, which is a friggin' long time. You said, look, hey, I've got the drive to sort of push through. Some people can sit back and go, holy crap, like, wow, and why? Did you? I mean, I'm just going to presume that you thought about giving up multiple times. Would that be right?
I think it was daily. I thought about giving up daily. You do it. There were times, I talk about it with my wife sometimes, there were times where I'd come home and I'd just put my head under the pillows in bed and I wouldn't even say hello to her. I'd just go, I can't do this. It's too hard. I think the support structure around you gives you that strength to keep putting one foot in front of the other. And I do think there are some old sayings that come to mind when I look back in those 7 years. I used to sort of repeat to myself, the best way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. So I was always trying to reduce things to what can I do right now to affect change and move the needle. I'm not going to worry about what's going to happen next week or the week after. What can I do today that's going to make those changes? And I think just keeping that mindset of trying to be sort of step-by-step focused keeps you sort of just grunting along. It's a bit like when you start at the gym. If you haven't been exercising for years, the thought of going to the gym is just overwhelming. Whereas if you think to yourself, I'm just going to go and do half an hour of walking on the treadmill, it's not such an arduous task. So I try to keep that in the back of my mind. And at the same time, a lot of people will come and talk to you and say, oh, these people are doing this, or have you seen what's happened over there? Or did you see what's happening next door with these people? And when I was growing up, I used to do a lot of sport. And one of the big things I used to do a lot of rowing, and one of the big things we used to talk about when we were rowing is you can't change what anybody else is doing. You can only change what you're doing. So in essence, you've got to row your own boat and focus on what you can do to affect change. So with those two sort of, I guess, constant feedback loops going into my head, it just kept me putting one foot in front of the other. But it was horrible. And some of the issues you have, you have employees, and you try and do the right thing by everybody, and there is an element of naivety, especially as you're doing a startup business. You can't know everything. So we had an employee that I'd been remiss and hadn't put them on a contract. They were a contractor, but I'd never got a formal contract because I was of the belief that we had a gentleman's agreement, agreement. Yeah. They'd invoice me, I'd pay the invoices, everybody seemed to be happy, but then we reached a disagreement, and they turned on me so quickly. Next thing I knew, I'm in court trying to settle this dispute, and I thought to myself, I've done everything I can to appease and keep people happy, and ultimately, you can't tick all the boxes, especially when you're in startup. And you walk away from that and you go, oh, well, I've learnt something there. But, you can't. But I kept saying to myself, I can't presume to know everything. They're going to, you can hear it on any TV show. If you talk to anybody that's been involved in sort of building a business, you're going to make mistakes. And I think the important thing is you've got to take the learnings and the lessons away from those mistakes and not let it dissuade you from what you're trying to achieve. Yeah, those 7 years, they were hard. But I wish I could go back in time and tell myself, this will get easier. There will be an outcome. But when you're staring down the barrel and you have no idea what's going to happen in the future, they're dark days, very dark days. And
at any
you
stage,
just have to focus on what you can do.
Did you feel stuck? So picking on the times where you're like, you know what, I do wish I could just quit. Were the stages where you were like, you had obligations, you may have had leases, it was like, hey, look, I'd love to quit, but there's no way that I feel I can? Were you in that position?
Absolutely. One of the big drivers was actually, we obviously as a family, we'd invested money to get it going, and I couldn't sort of live with myself to not try and maximize the return of that. So at the same time, we had leases in place. I had staff working for me that you felt beholden, that had come across to you because you've sold them the vision and the mission, and that they're sort of bought into the idea of what you were trying to achieve. So just abandoning that just didn't seem to be something you could do, and it's something I couldn't live with. So off the back of that, I would have loved, there were plenty of times there that I wanted to pull out, and I just wanted to go, you know what, I'm going to throw my hands up and do something that's far easier. But I think in the end, it's those elements that are in place that keep you sort of pushing one step in front of the other and keep going.
Looking back, do you think you would want to go through that journey again?
That is an excellent question. Having the knowledge I have now, would I want to go through that again? Absolutely, because there is a lot that I would do differently. Not having the knowledge I've got now and almost going back to square one, I don't know if I could do it. It's like the fishhook principle. You've almost got to go through it because you can't get out the other side. You've got to push the hook through because you can't pull it back out. I think there's a lot. I think to myself sometimes, when I sit back at night now, looking back at the better part of 12 or 13 years, I think I'm tremendously proud of what we've achieved. Not because it's been a massive financial success or it's given me huge sort of notoriety or anything. I'm tremendously proud of the fact that so many people said we couldn't do it, and we've come out the other side. I can live with myself sort of changing people's lives and putting people back on a pathway to be part of life again, which I wasn't getting those elements from the jobs I was doing previous to starting the business. So it's a difficult question to answer. Would I do it again? You know what? I probably would, and it'd still be probably as hard.
Look, I think this is touching on this a lot, that a lot of founders start with passion, but that passion alone does not build a sustainable business. How did you kind of balance that emotional mission with the commercial reality?
I think you can see the opportunity. So obviously I had a passion there that stemmed from family experience, but I also, based on, having worked with big businesses in Australia, you can see the commercial opportunities that present themselves. And one of the unique opportunities you have, not only as an entrepreneur, but as somebody that is sort of building a business from nothing, is that you are the master, you're the conductor. So you can make decisions in an instant that can affect the business in a big way without having to go through the bureaucracy or the palaver of trying to keep everybody happy. So one of the things I really enjoy about the work that I do is that if, I'll take AI for example. AI is obviously a growing area, and its application is being looked at in a number of different places across a number of different business streams. In healthcare, it is rapidly changing the way we interact with patients. It's rapidly changing the way we interact with family members and loved ones. It's rapidly changing the way we interact with regulatory bodies around Australia. I have the ability to implement elements of AI and elements of AI process-driven work rapidly. So we can make a decision today and roll out a process tomorrow that'll ultimately see an uptick in process or patient outcomes next week. And I find that, and that leads directly to a commercial reality. And I find that gives me that balance. So when the passion wanes, I can it's almost finding a secondary passion in the problem solving and sort of the increased sort of commercial reality that we can see by being able to make those decisions and implement that change effectively. It's not something I'd have the opportunity of doing if I was working for a big organization. That's what I love now, is looking at it through that lens.
Now, Toby, you and I, you've just been saying it before, you've had the battle scars. Like, you went through this business and you've learned, you've got hard. Along the way, there were people going, don't do it. Just don't do it. And you stood there and go, no, I'm doing it anyway. Now, here's a question for you. Let's say a new entrepreneur came along and said to you, Toby, hey, I'm going to be doing this job or I'm going to be starting this business. And you tell them, don't do it. Should they listen to you or not?
That is a great question. I would like to think in that particular interaction, I would say don't do it, but for these reasons. So in that regard, yes, I think I'd listen to myself. I think you have to measure somebody's advice with what information or what data it gives you. I had a lot of people tell me don't do it that had no healthcare experience. I had a lot of people tell me don't do it that were other small business providers, but had never run a service delivery business in the way that I was looking at running it. So I didn't listen to them mainly because, and there was a bit of arrogance there. I felt that I knew better. So there is a little bit of arrogance there on my behalf. But there's also an understanding that I'd built up, obviously, with doing some background research and the work that I'd done behind the scenes, that I felt gave me a leverage point that they didn't understand. So to go back to your question, would I listen to myself? Unless I was an expert in the area, not necessarily. I think what I'd do is I'd take on the advice that I hope I would have given. It's very weird talking to about myself in this way, but then I'd use that in my decision-making process whilst I gathered other advice from other areas. Unless that person has been and done what you're seeking to do, I don't think that they can unequivocally give you the same level of assurance as to whether your ideas or your plan is a go or no-go type situation.
Okay. Now, Toby, moving on, at the start of the show, I said, hey, you're not just into Arrow Health, you are an entrepreneur. So what else have you been up to in the last couple of years?
Quite a bit. Once again, leveraging off the experience that I've had building Arrow from startup, I've then been sort of tapped on the shoulder and said, hey, can you come and have a look at this? Can you come and have a look at that? So at the moment, there's a business in Australia called Soda King, which was being run. It's a competitor for SodaStream. It's essentially a soda gas organisation. It unfortunately went into administration, and I was sort of brought in with a number of other individuals to help rebuild it and get it out of the hole that it was in. So I've been working with Soda King to try and not only sort of stabilise the operation and the sort of commercial realities and the finances behind how it's funded, but also to grow it as one of the leading providers of soda gas in the country. And I think that's been really effective, and we're on a pathway there because Soda King is the Aussie one, as we like to say. So, but not only that, I've sort of been getting my toe in a number of other different businesses. I'm currently, at the moment, I'm in Bali in Indonesia, looking to develop sort of a similar sort of sort of therapeutic healthcare business here. Not because Australia doesn't offer that kind of opportunity. It's just that Bali provides a number of opportunities that Australia doesn't have. And with the demographic that we're looking at for this particular business, it's for people that are currently working that are looking. It's more of a retreat style as opposed to the hospital that we're doing in Wood End. Also, and there are a number of other businesses I've sort of been involved with, particularly around sort of recalibrating and building from bumps or obstacles that have been set up. And COVID was a big one for a lot of these businesses. So a lot of businesses are still reeling from the effects of COVID and sort of the operational downturn. And a lot of it comes down to sort of realigning and reorganising what the focus is and helping to sort of create steps to get out again.
Now, I want to come back to that point, but before we move on, let's talk about this Bali thing. You said that it allows more opportunities or different opportunities as opposed to Australia. Can you sort of expand on what some of those may be?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Australia is the lucky country. It's a great country. But the problem with Australia, and the problem that I've found, especially with Arrow, is that there is an inordinate amount of bureaucratic red tape that stops you from being able to do very simple tasks, whether it's hiring and firing of staff, whether it's payroll. I mean, any of your listeners know, especially coming up to end of financial year, there's a big change in superannuation, the way super is to be paid, which is going to affect cash flow for the businesses that are running in Australia, and that's something you need to plan for. But there always seems to be government interaction, and there's very little, and if I'm speaking honestly, there's very little incentive to create a business or a startup in Australia. Whereas in Bali, for example, or in Indonesia at large, if you have a crack at trying to build a business from nothing, you don't actually have to pay any tax, or you have to pay very little tax. Don't rely on what I'm saying, but the tax rates are very small for the first 3 years in order to give you the opportunity to get the business started and get the finances rolling in. And it's simple things like that give you the opportunity to take the dream that you have or the ideas that you have and give them a reality. So in Bali, not only is following the letter of the law, not only the labour costs less here, but the opportunities are so much more diverse. To do a startup operation, we were looking at a certain type of business that we were looking at trialing here just to see if it would work. The trial cost would be about 50 to 80,000 AUD, Australian dollars, whereas to do the same thing in Australia, the trial cost would be about $500,000. So when you're comparing those types of numbers and you're looking at something that you're thinking to yourself, I've got the passion to do this, I've got the want to do this, but the capital, the risky part, which is the capital injection, do I want to risk $500,000 or do I want to try and risk 50,000 just to see if it's got legs? You're always going to go with the $50,000 one and see if it's got legs and prove the concept before sort of committing to growing it and putting in those man hours. The reason I'm here is just for that reason. It's because I want to trial a few concepts, see what it takes, and then use that to then grow and expand.
Look, I love Bali. And, kind of have ideas and thoughts that maybe I should move over there. I do have a family though. And, both extended and close family. So that's probably the thing that holds me here. Do you have a family at all, Toby?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And do they travel with you or are you doing the long distance thing?
No, so they're here. So I brought them all across. My kids are going to school here. So I've got 3 children. They're going to school here. And my wife is actually helping me coordinate all these little bits, different businesses that we're working on. So we sort of work in tandem with respect to that. And then I go back to Australia at the moment. I've basically gone back to the start because I'm doing this fly in, fly out thing, it would seem. So I go back to the start to Australia for about 10 days every month, and I concentrate on the business there. And then I come back here and I sort of work remotely and spend time with the family here. But I will say this, living in Bali gives me the balance that I've always been after. I've always been cognizant of the fact that during COVID, I was doing, 80-hour weeks in Melbourne, coming home at night when the kids had already gone to bed. I was getting up and going to work in the morning before the kids had really got up. Here, it's given me that balance of spending quality time with the kids and my wife, while still being able to focus on what I want to do in a business capacity. So, but it's not for, our time here is not forever. So we're very cognizant of the fact that this is a period of our lives, I guess, that we're going to spend here, and eventually we'll be back in Australia, and we'll do the next period of our lives in Australia. But a lot of Australians have this vision of the world through a very narrow lens. They see Australia as the be all and end all. I mean, they're aware, obviously, of America and all these other countries, but in terms of a business sense, you see the Australian market as the market. So whenever I talk to people like, oh, we've got to take this to market, we've got to test this in the Australian market. The world is a big place, and living here, and I'm quite sort of embedded in the expat community here. Everybody's doing the same thing. There are Norwegians, there are Colombians, there are Americans, there are New Zealanders, all sitting here doing exactly what I'm doing. They're sort of exposed to a wider market. They're exposed to greater opportunity, even through conversations here. I'm terrible at networking. It's one thing I wish I was better at. I'm a horrible networker, but I'm forced to network here just by virtue of the fact that we seem to be in the same places, and the opportunities that opens up is amazing. Yeah, the Bali thing is working at the moment. It's not a forever solution or a forever plan, but certainly at the moment it seems to have been the right choice.
Now, before we started this podcast, we started to go down the track of, doing business and what it's been like. You've hinted to it here in Australia. And I will say, look, calling from New Zealand here, New Zealand seems like the even poorer cousin of Australia, but mimics a lot what's sort of going on, possibly even harder. So what's your honest take on doing business in Australia, and especially these years since COVID?
Listen, I'm from Victoria. My honest take is it's incredibly difficult at the moment, and I think it's going to get harder, especially for the next, say, 12 to 18 months, especially in Victoria, because the amount of support from the government, the amount of support from the consumer is waning. People are finding life harder. I'm pretty much guaranteed that Australia is in a recession at the moment. It just hasn't been reported yet. And as a consequence of that, you're seeing less disposable income. You're seeing less people. People's priorities are changing in terms of what they're willing to spend their money on. I think it's going to get harder in Australia. However, and I go back to the AI principle, being cognizant of the opportunities that technology and things like AI, and I'm only talking about AI at the moment because I've been looking at it in depth over the past couple of weeks. It does make some of those operations, some of those business sort of decision-making processes easier. So in the past, if I was costing out sort of a service delivery model, it would take me hours to go through and cost it out and sort of do it, because I'd be using spreadsheets and going by hand and sort of going, oh yeah, well, this is going to cost this, and this is my forecasting. Now the same thing will take 10 minutes, because using AI, you can do all the forecasting and process. So although the cost of doing business is rising in Australia, at the same time, there are these inherent savings of time and money in other areas. What am I trying to say? The passion and the drive is going to need to increase, I think, in order to keep doing business in Australia. But there are inherent opportunities at the moment. And I personally believe everything is cyclic. This period that we're going through now will end, and then we'll be sort of on the uptick of a sort of a boom economy. And that's when all the hard work now will pay off. So, it's hard now. Everything's cyclic, and in a year or two, it'll become easier, and hopefully the hard work now will pay off in a year or two.
We mentioned before that, Arrow really took a good 7 years to get to some kind of a point where you were happy and you could see the rainbows at the end of that. Nowadays, when you're looking at opportunities, like, how far out are you looking ahead for these businesses? Like, are you go, you know what, we want to give this 3 years, we want to give it 5 years? Because I know people starting out in business get antsy after 3 months.
Yeah.
But for you, what do you reckon is that time frame for some kind of a return or some kind of success?
Listen, I think 7 years for Arrow was slightly longer than I anticipated. I think 3 to 7 years is a sweet spot. Call it 5 in the middle, because it really does take that amount of time. When you're talking about sort of building a brand, building notoriety in the industry that you're working in, at Arrow, we talk about being a thought leader. So being trying to demonstrate to the market that you're a thought leader, that you mean what you say, that you're not only responsible, but you have integrity, that you're out there doing the best that you can with what you have. It takes time, and there's inevitable, no matter how much planning you put in place, no matter I guess how much sort of experience that your team has, they're inevitable roadblocks that you will need to look at and pivot almost on a daily basis, especially in the early days. So, I think nothing is going to happen. Nothing meaningful, I think, will happen in 3 to 5 months. It's really got to be sort of a 3 to 5 year plan, and then and that's really where you can test your mettle in whatever industry or work that you're trying to do. And coupled with that, Arrow is really the sum of its parts. The success of Arrow is built on the people that work there. I'd love to say it was all me and I did everything and it's great, but it's not. The success of what we do is the team that I have around me. And, it sounds so cliche that you need to have good people around you, but it's so important. And it's the one thing, if you were to ask me what's the one big thing I'd like to change when we started Arrow, it would be HR. I never got HR right until about the 4 year mark. And that cost me horribly in terms of attracting and retaining good people. Mm-hmm. And the good people, a good, in my, just for me right now, a good manager will make all the difference in terms of how the business, whether the business is successful or whether it takes a bit of a nosedive. So, really any business is a sum of its parts, and the people are so important. And, I think, looking back on my time, I wish I'd sort of noted that down a little bit earlier, but but getting that team together, it takes time because you get wonderful resumes, you can get wonderful, what are they called, when you ring people up, references, but ultimately, you never see the worth of a person until you put them in place, and there's a little bit of trial and error there.
And so personally, I would far higher on attitude as opposed to experience or skill. Someone's got the right attitude, yeah, they can learn what they need to learn. But if they haven't got the right attitude, they can just find a better place to work at.
I couldn't agree more. In fact, you bring up an interesting point because I've obviously done a lot of work with our HR team and sort of HR in the past. I'll walk into a meeting and I'll know within 30 seconds whether this person's going to work at Arrow Health or not. And it's not based on their resume and it's not based on references or what they've done in the past. As you quite rightly put, it's about their attitude. If I walk into the room and I'm thinking to myself, I need this person at Arrow, they could have never have touched therapeutic or medical service delivery, but that attitude translates, thousands of times into the team that they're working in. So no, couldn't agree more.
Okay, so one thing that I believe listening to you that you've learnt is the importance of balance in your life. You've got your family there, you're in Bali now. It feels like that, hey, there's some kind of lifestyle here, I'm going to presume. But you've also said earlier on, growing was like, oh my gosh, I was working my ring out. Didn't even have time to say hello to the family. How long did it take you to learn that? And what was the crutch points and what have you done to keep that balance now, if you've got it?
So I think, and it's a bit of a unique position for me because what really turned the heat up was COVID. So COVID, obviously we're a healthcare provider in Victoria, which was the most locked down part of the world. There was a myriad of issues that we were presented with in terms of running Arrow through that 2 year period. So off the back of that, my wife essentially said to me, we need a circuit breaker because you can't keep doing what you're doing. Otherwise you'll fall into an early grave. And I sort of listened to her, and I was aware of the fact that I was struggling with delegating. I wasn't delegating enough to the people underneath me. I had all these ideas, and I'd sit sort of at 2:00 in the morning because I wasn't sleeping. And I'd sit at 2:00 in the morning looking up at the ceiling, and I'd be like, "Oh, we've got to do this, and I want to do this, and we should be doing this, and why haven't we done this yet? And we could do this." And I couldn't get out of this sort of, I was starting a million things and not finishing anything. So lucky for me, she was the driver for this circuit breaker. And because by moving here, it forced me to delegate. Now, we only moved here for 6 months, 3 years ago. But it's been tremendously beneficial from a balance point of view because I've had to delegate and I've had to change the way I operate, which I think has ultimately been better for the business because it's being able to run by itself without me constantly having to check on it and push it. But at the same time, we do have a balance here. The lifestyle here is great, and we do have a balance here. It's not all bells and whistles. I always like to say beer and Skittles, but obviously in a sort of mental health and addiction treatment provider, it's sort of not that PC. So It's not all positive because there are elements like I don't enjoy the working remotely all the time. There are times where I feel like it would be much better to be face to face. I'm not a big believer in people working away from each other. I think working as a team, there are synergistic opportunities that are missed if everybody's away. When you're just in the room together, workshopping a problem, naturally outcomes come and they flow much easier. And that's why I'm so particular about I've got to be back for periods of time because I need that face-to-face interaction with the team. Even I call it FaceTime, even if I don't achieve anything, just being there and talking colloquially with the staff and just making sure that they're happy and that their needs and wants are being heard and that we're moving towards outcomes. It has a tremendous impact. So it's not all, there is a balance and it's a very real balance. But for me personally, certainly having the time here has created an opportunity to spend time not only with the family but for me as well on things that keeps my brain not just arrow focused but focused on other things.
And right now, like I said, you're looking at new startups, you're helping other companies, you're involved in a lot. Do you see yourself doing a lot of those things moving into the future, or do you think it will all come to a head and like, you know what? No, I'm going down this road.
No, I think when I sit back and think about what the future looks like, I think it's going to be a lot of different things because for me personally, and knowing my track record, I don't like to do the same thing for too long. I like to sort of bounce around because from a creative point of view, you just have different ideas. I was talking with somebody the other day. My best ideas come in the shower. In fact, if anybody's listening, having a whiteboard in the shower, that's something that doesn't rub it off, is a tremendous idea because I sit in the shower because I sit there and I'm like, that's a great idea. We need to do that. Or that, why haven't we done that before? And then inevitably I get out and I've gone, what was I thinking about? I've totally forgotten about it. But I do a lot of that. And I think, for the future, and interestingly, over the past couple of years, I've sort of been involved with a number of different sort of CEO groups. So bunches of CEOs getting together because we all suffer the same problems. You sort of think you're isolated and that your problems are your own and they're not the same and nobody else can help you with that. It's not true. A lot of the problems that business entrepreneurs, business owners, people that are trying to start up face have been faced before. And there are a lot of people out there with knowledge that can come and help you and say, have you thought about doing it this way? Or have you used this particular tool? Because we found that has worked in the past. Sometimes I think, there's opportunity to that's essentially what I do now is I go in and we help these people or businesses that are struggling a little bit. And it's really just using the same concepts that I learned when I was starting up and applying it to different areas. And I think that's probably where my future will probably go because I don't, startup is hard and I've sort of ticked that box now. And, I think it's more about helping others achieve their goals. But in a number of different areas.
Very much like my journey.
Yes.
Hey,
that's
Toby,
essentially what I was alluding to.
Yeah. I mean, thank you so much for sharing your story, not just of Arrow Health, but whatever's going on, a little bit of commentary of the market and the rest. Now, if people want to learn more about either Arrow Health or get in contact with yourself, where's the best place to reach you?
Always the website, arrowhealth.com.au. But if you really want to understand the story and of where we've come from, I put together a documentary essentially called Guided by Hope. It's on YouTube. And it goes through the entire origin story and shows the steps and the obstacles and not really from a business case, but just from a personal point of view of what we've had to go through in order to build up from there. So that's on YouTube, on the Arrow Health YouTube page, and arrowhealth.com.au is where we can find anything else about us.
Hey, listen, if you're listening to this episode right now and it's got you thinking differently about your business, whether it's sales, systems, or strategy, that is the point. So if you want help identifying your biggest bottleneck, mapping out your next smart move, you can also book a free call through myself and the Coach Birds team. Thanks again, Toby, for coming on. And to everyone listening, remember, maybe the next biggest idea is selling whiteboards for the shower. I'll leave that one with you. Thanks very much, Toby.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Let's talk small business. I appreciate you tuning in. If you got value, hit subscribe, like, or drop a comment. It spreads the word and might just help another legend get their breakthrough.